Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Dr. Herbert Harris with another edition of Success Talk. And tonight we have a very, very special guest, author Chris Johnson and friend, a person I've known for many years and have really watched him work on this topic, this area of economic development with such passion and such clarity that he has created an incredible body of work. So, Chris, welcome to Success Talk.
Greetings.
Well, my friend, when I was looking at your book and I wrote a part of the forward, I was just so impressed with how detailed, how you really analyzed it. Sometimes you'll have books that have a lot of fluff, but this was a book with so much substance. And so I asked, who is Chris Johnson? A little about your background that could prepare you for writing a book like this.
Oh man. Well, um, born in Hempstead, Long Island, New York.
Mm-hmm.
Raised in part in South Carolina. Graduated from high school in 1988 from South Carolina. Spent time in the Midwest between Nebraska and Iowa. Attended a junior college in Iowa, and then relocated to the East Coast, where I attended Edinburgh University in Pennsylvania, and finally finished up my studies at Sage College of Albany in Albany, New York. My major was actually interdisciplinary studies, but the emphasis was on business.
Okay.
So after I graduated, what I wanted to do, and maybe this was just something that took place organically,
Mm-hmm.
is developing a philosophy. Well, I'll put it this way. A lot of times when we see financial books, personal finance books, business books, etc., a lot of them are not really written from what I call an African-centered perspective. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because as a people, we have some very unique challenges domestically and globally that most of these books don't really address. The ones that are out there, I think they take more of an academic and a conceptual theoretical approach. My thing was, how do I deal with it at a level where somebody who's starting at ground zero can work their way up?
Mm.
Okay. So when I started, oh, and I do have a copy of the book. It's got, here we are.
Yes.
Yes, this is
Yes.
the Gospel of Afronomics Theology.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And basically, what I'm holding in my hand is probably about maybe 22, 23 years of personal experience and research in areas of business, economics, entrepreneurship, and finance,
Mm.
where, and you've probably seen this yourself in your travels, where there really has to be something where we take something from a conceptual to an operational
Mm.
perspective. Okay. And there's 4 steps that I took.
Mm-hmm.
The first step is philosophy. Everything begins with a philosophy. Okay.
Mm.
The second is a program.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
From the program, you go to a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And then from a plan, you go into process. By the time you reach process, now you should be in an operational mode.
Mm. Yes. Well,
Okay.
as you were sharing that, I think you started from a perspective of many of you might say, the economic based books are not from a Afrocentric perspective. And that as a result, it's almost like another paradigm to approach basic economics from that perspective. And
Right.
why do you think that is?
Well, like I said, there's unique challenges that we have as a people. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do a little history, for
Yes.
example. Let's start with the end of the Civil War. Okay. And from 1865 to roughly about maybe 1910, with no college degrees or any other form of degrees, as a people, we were able to amass maybe 15, almost 20 million acres of land.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. On top of that, we were also beginning to create our own businesses,
Mm.
in most cases out of necessity.
Yes.
Now, one of those things, and I don't know if you're familiar with this statistic, I came across this in my research, that if you look at all of the black people in America who got lynched,
Mm-hmm.
over 80% of them were business owners, entrepreneurs.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So when I saw that, I said, okay, so now we're dealing with a situation where through epigenetics, are we afraid to actually build something for ourselves for fear of it being torn down by outsiders?
Now, Chris, you have really tapped into a vein there. One of those
Mm,
veins that, basically the government, the power structure right now does not want to acknowledge. And
mm,
when we
mm,
think about that, um, from 1910, Saturday, the George Henry White Foundation had an event up in Bladen County. George Henry White was the last black congressman after the Reconstruction. And so that
mm,
period of time from 1865 to 1901, there was really a spirit of righteousness, a spirit of inclusion. And as you said, black people who had been enslaved were very dedicated to a proposition of economic, because one of the fundamental tenets was economics and education were the solution. But
mm.
from about 1902 and 1898, I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina, in the insurrection, the coup of 1898 in North Carolina.
Okay.
That sent a paradigm, that sent a process to mainly the southern states, but also the northern states, of literally voter intimidation, black codes, a whole systemic approach to controlling, demeaning, and undermining the development of black people in America. And so it's no surprise that the black businessmen, because lynching was not only a racist thing, it was a control and it was a messaging to
Mm, mm.
businesses. You if you look, many of the black businesses, that whole Black Wall Street phenomenon, many of the black
Right.
businesses that were destroyed by the white power structure, the white people, never recovered.
Mm,
And you have to sometimes I look at America and I say, we're a great country, but can you imagine what America could have been if it had embraced the black the black experience as a part of its own rather than attacking and tearing it down? And so I think you're
right.
absolutely right. If your house keeps getting burned down every time you try to build it, sooner or later you stop building. Okay.
Right.
And then the system turns around now and blames you and says you're lazy for not building, when it's a conditioned response taught by the very people now who are claiming that you're a lazy, shiftless people who contribute nothing to the world. And that is their forced definition of who we are that satisfy them. And so that economics from that Afrocentric perspective is totally different. I think your work is a great service to help us understand that.
Mm. And I think once we understand, I heard a metaphysician, Reverend Philippe Phillips. He says, there's nothing wrong with us, but something has happened to us.
Mm,
Okay.
yes.
And because of what has happened to us, there's certain behaviors that we do that some may consider inappropriate or working against our best interests, at least from an economic perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, for example, when when we had Negro League Baseball,
Yes.
okay, it was the third largest independent black owned entity in America.
Mm.
Negro League Baseball had become more international than Major League Baseball
Mm.
because it started barnstorming all throughout Latin America. That's how we were able to pick up Roberto Clemente out of Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, in order to curtail the emergence of Negro League Baseball, because 20% of their fan base was white,
Mm.
because the promise of, okay, we're going to have an all-star game between Major League and the Negro League, but they never brought the Negro Leagues to face Babe Ruth. So now the white folks were like, well, look, let's just go there.
Mm-hmm.
And in many cases, they felt they had a greater experience there than they did in Major League Baseball. So when they came up with the idea of quote unquote breaking the color barrier
Mm-hmm.
with Jackie Robinson, it wasn't so much about social justice as it was about neutralizing an emerging economic power.
Mm. So
Once Jackie,
they saw the Negro baseball leagues as a threat.
right, and that's why I said because they were more international than Major League Baseball.
Mm-hmm.
So had they grown and you started picking up more Latin American players, particularly more Afro Latino
Mm-hmm.
players, okay, that could really, turn the table
Mm.
with Negro League Baseball. So the whole Jackie Winston thing was more about breaking the economic muscle that Negro League Baseball was creating.
Mm-hmm.
Once you were able to get Jackie in there, then you got uh, Satchel Paige,
Mm-hmm.
Larry Bow, and others to where it eventually got dismantled.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's almost like the Velvet Riot. that you know we burned the house. We didn't have to burn the house down. We just moved everybody out, and the houses fell down on their own. Wow.
Right.
Mm, mm. It's so interesting, Chris, because America there is no morality. Then America has in our book solving the race issue we call it the three P's: power, profit, and pleasure.
Mm.
And America functions on that basis. Anytime you see something happening, even if it appears racist, you look further, there's always an economic reason for it. Even
Right.
integration, you know, when you were talking about the baseball leagues, I was thinking about integration. So I grew up in the 50s. Mhm. I
Mm.
grew up with white only. I never talked to a white person in any meaningful conversation until I was 16 years old in New York at Columbia. And
Mm.
so we saw the water fountains. It amazed me as a young man how a Chinese restaurant could come from China, open a restaurant, and black people couldn't go buy Chinese food. I think my paradigm as a child was I always wanted to taste Chinese food because they only served white people. So,
Mm.
so this whole the civil rights movement really was an economic experience. It was not there was a morality issue. Dr. King and those who really understood that level of it. But from a
Mm.
white perspective, it was really an economic decision. And it was like looking, hey, we have a major segment of the American population that has their own stores, their own cab companies, their own hotels. And that's in spite of everything that was done to undermine it, you know.
Right.
And now with integration, all of that disappeared. And so
Mm.
once again, it's that economic undermining of a people based on profit.
Mm. And there's another chapter, since you fast forwarded into the civil rights Black Power era,
Mhm.
in the movie industry at that time, Hollywood was going broke.
Mhm.
Okay. Paramount was on the verge of bankruptcy. They had to pawn Judy Garland's slippers from the Wizard of Oz to keep their doors open. And they only got maybe 20 to 25,000 for that. Okay. The saving grace of Hollywood was a young film producer out of Chicago named Melvin Van Peebles,
Mhm.
who
Mhm.
get he could not get access to the American film system. So he moves to Paris, and then he comes back as a part of a French delegate in order to participate in this film conference.
Mhm.
Okay, he opened the door. I say that he is the godfather of what I call guerrilla filmmaking.
Mhm.
Okay, he raised money to create the quote unquote black exploitation classic called
Mhm.
Sweet Sweetbacks.
I know it.
Okay.
Now let me just put a pin there for a minute. I know
All right.
Melvin, and when Melvin came to New York, he came to us because we wanted to. The movie theaters wouldn't show Sweetback, and so we
Mm,
actually had to go to the RKO. Well, I think it was Alhambra, the movie theater on 125th Street, and the only time we could rent the theater was Sweetback was shown. The premiere was at midnight in Harlem. Okay, and
ooh.
yeah, and so and I mean that whole experience, I knew Melvin very well and saw his determination. But he built on guys
Mm,
like Oscar Michaud. You know,
right.
yeah, he built on guy because there was a whole, it's Chris, your work is so important, man. I was talking with some young people just today, and I said, there was a black actor, Mantan Moreland,
Mm,
and you know what they said? You're kidding, Doc. You're kidding. I said, no. Mantan Moreland was a very, very popular black actor during the late 20s, the 30s, and 40s. He died, I think, 1973, but he did
okay.
numerous films. And I said, one of his great franchises as kids, we used to go to the movies on Saturday. They had a new film every week. And
Oh wow.
one of the great films was the whole series, the Charlie Chan series. And I mean, that was as racist as it gets. A white man
Oh
playing Charlie Chan. The Charlie Chan's children, so diminished. You had a number one son, number two son, number three son. Okay, and Mantan Moreland he was the chauffeur, and
man.
he had that look that white people wanted to see. He was very dark. He had the buck eyes. That was one of his
Oh
things.
yeah.
Yeah, he portrayed that. But Mantan, and so and when the kids Googled it, it popped up. They were like,
Yeah.
"Oh my God, Dr. Harris, we had no idea. We did not know this." And so
Mm-hmm.
when we look at that whole film era, that there is there was an entire industry developing among the black filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
And
Now, yeah.
yes, go back. I'm sorry. Mhm.
Oh yeah. Okay. Now to go continue once Melvin Van Peebles had it in the can. Uh, he basically hired a young band to do the score.
Mhm.
That band eventually became Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Mm.
Okay. Now, when it got to the rating of the movie, it was rated X by an all white jury.
Yes.
So he took advantage of that. And what you were alluding to about, having to show it at unusual times of the night. So he
Mhm.
took advantage of that. That movie in 1972, it grossed independently about 25 to $30 million
Mhm.
in 1972.
Mhm.
So Hollywood saw that and they said, wait a minute, we've been leaving a lot of money on the table.
Mhm.
So based on what Van Peebles was able to do independently, then you had Gordon Parks,
Yes.
who created Superfly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's right. Gordon Parks, who did Shaft,
Mm-hmm.
Gordon Jr. did Superfly. And
Mm-hmm.
here's another thing. 2022, this year, it's a special year. What do what does The Godfather and Superfly have in common?
Mm.
They both turned 50 this year.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And when The Godfather was released by Paramount, and that's a whole nother story,
Mm-hmm.
one out of every three movie viewers who saw The Godfather were black.
Mm. Wow.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, Melvin indirectly kind of saved Hollywood because when they saw he was able to do something without the Hollywood apparatus,
Mm-hmm.
they realized how much money they were leaving on the table.
Yes. Yes. You know, research and history, understanding stuff. There's everything that we see today. There's a logical journey from the past to this moment here. So when we look at
Mm,
you look at Black Panther. Now, if you look around of all the films ever made, I think Black Panther is about fifth on the list of all-time earnings. And just
mm,
think about that. And that was still almost like with half the players on the field. That when you
mm.
had those massive giants, they could just put the movie in more places. But in spite of all that, Black Panther is one of the I think one of the top five all time great grossing films of top grossing films of all time. And so you're absolutely that's such a profound insight because it always goes back to the economics there. There was entire when I was the young people were did a little research on Mantan, there was an entire black film community that had developed, and they were showing, like a completely separate audience, and then it segues and interacted with vaudeville. I mean, when I was a kid, on Wednesday nights we would go to the theater, and they had live shows, and there was black shows. There was Step and Fetch It. It was Red Fox. And
Mm.
they were just amazed that Mantan Moreland had worked with Red Fox. Mantan was ahead of Red Fox because he had made it into the mainstream, playing a black figure, black stereotype.
Okay.
But he was in a sense bigger than they were. But he paid the price of going. As a matter of fact, Mantan was actually when one of the three Stooges died, the others wanted to bring Mantan in as a replacement for the third Stooge, but the studios just would not have it.
Wow.
Yeah. So now, Chris, in we can see that this whole struggle has been just that, a struggle.
Mm,
In your personal life, I like to, people like yourself, myself, people who've like taken a stand against certain things. But in your
right.
personal life, we all have those challenges, those moments. I sometimes call it a Tyler Perry moment. When you lost your apartment, when you're sleeping in the car, when you put your last dime into a theater production and it rains
Mm.
and nobody shows and nobody shows up, and you say like, Lord,
Right.
what keeps you going? Have you had one of those David or some of those David and Goliath moments in your life as you've been moving to where you are right now?
Well, the book itself,
Mm-hmm.
um, I had already started on, putting notes together and started kind of writing. Then, I guess you would say the perfect storm happened. Depression, divorce, uh, diabetes, etc. And then going through a period of homelessness. And I had to put everything in storage while I was trying to work my way through that. I guess I would call it that age of turbulence.
Mm.
And the manuscript at that time, it had sat in storage for 5 years. Okay. Once I was able to finally get my apartment, I went and got my things out of storage. You know how when you keep something in storage and the mice eat through the boxes.
Yes.
Okay. When I went through and I unpacked the manuscript, the mice never touched it.
Wow.
So to me, that was a sign saying, okay, um, go ahead and finish this book.
Yes.
So from 2015 to finally about February of 2021, I worked on the book until I finally was able to get it using Amazon as a distributor and putting the book out. So just having to work through all of those turbulent moments. And then to me, that was a sign that the mice never got to eat it. And I
Wow.
said, okay, I need to finish this book.
Wow. 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 And I think that's the thing, Chris. We got to teach our young people. It's like there was a vision that you had. When you go through those turbulent times, something
Hmm.
keeps you going. Something sometimes it's like a parent, like I often heard what my father said or a grandparent. I didn't know my grandparents. They died before I was
Hmm.
really conscious. But was there in your life somebody when number one, was there a vision that kept you going, something you saw for yourself or something you saw for your work, your place in the world? And was there a person, one of those pivotal people that came to you and said, look, let me show you the way?
Hmm. I think one person I could think of, and Mary Morrissey. Okay.
Mm,
She asked a question. She says, are you living your life by your vision or your condition?
mm,
Okay.
mhm,
And I think whatever my vision was for getting this book out. Oh, and there's another gentleman you may be familiar with, Dr. Miles Monroe.
mm, yes.
Okay. There's a workshop that he does about how to write and publish a book.
Hmm.
And he talked about how he was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, giving a workshop on a particular subject. There was a gentleman from a publishing company in the audience who came to him and said, that was the most unique perspective of that topic. You need to write a book about it. And he
Hmm.
says, no, 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 I'm just a preacher from the Bahamas. And she's, look, just take my card. So he goes back to the hotel and he said that he tossed and turned.
Hmm.
And when he woke up, he said God told him 3 reasons why he needed to write that book.
Mm,
Okay. The third reason that God told him to write the book, he says, look, if you do not write this book, you are a generational thief.
mm. A
Okay.
generational thief.
So, yeah. So he wakes up the next morning. He has breakfast with the publisher, and the publisher says, look, just send me all your tapes, recorded of your shops. So he packed everything up, sent it to the publisher. Within 4 weeks, they come back with a working draft of a manuscript. And
Mm,
so all he did was just went through, made corrections, sent it back, and probably within another 2 to 3 weeks, he had a published book.
hmm.
So
Hmm.
so I remember that saying about not being a generational thief because you never want, I think it was Les Brown that said, live full, die empty.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
And so I said, when I write this, is there some unborn African who will benefit from this 50 years from now,
Hmm.
75 years from now?
Hmm.
Okay. So it's thinking about those yet to be born that I think served as a driving force for me to continue and finally complete what became the book.
Wow. You know, it's funny. It seems to be like a common process, that idea of finishing it, of completing it. When we were, and the book is always there. The book is
Mhm.
always there. we may not see how to manifest it, but it's always there. The ideas are always there. And I remember when our first book was a book called How to Make Money in Music. And
Mm.
that book would never have been written if we had an agent, someone I knew from college, and we actually got an advance on that book. We wrote 3 chapters and an outline.
Mm.
And that was one of the funny things we learned from, and he was a white guy, Jewish guy. And what we learned, matter of fact, I think Nelson George did the first review of the book in the Amsterdam News, was that white guys have been doing that all along. Been writing the outline, have been coming in with an idea and an outline and getting an advance to go on and write the
Yeah.
book. Where most of the black guys, the Baldwins, those guys had to have a finished product so that they could
Mm.
then judge it as far as its marketability. In other words, no faith in the creator, only faith
Right.
in the created, in the product. And if it had not been for that, we may never have written the book because, we got through those 3 chapters, but it was a whole different paradigm knowing that you had a publisher already in place, and on a very practical term, knowing that you had a check
Right.
already in place. Yeah.
True. Very true.
And so when you were writing your book, a lot of times when you don't know that, and I think as Dr. Miles Monroe was thinking, it's like it's already there, but you have to be able to bring it out, and you really did a great job at that. And all writers that stick to itiveness, that persistence, that seeing the vision and whatever it takes to make it manifest, that's the difference. And that's how you get your gift to the world. Mm, mm, mm. Yeah.
Yeah. And then also what it how can I put this? It was Michael Irvin, Hall of Fame receiver.
Mm-hmm.
He went back to the University of Miami to talk to the New Hurricanes there during the spring game.
Mm-hmm.
And he said something that stuck with me. He talked about process before the prize.
Mm. Woo. Yes.
Okay. Process before the prize. And a lot of times everybody wants the prize without the process, but not realizing that the process is more valuable than the prize because the process lasts longer. So
Mm.
in other words, who did I have to become in order to finish that book?
Mm. Okay.
Okay. So I think it was Les Brown. He says, if you want to achieve something you've never achieved, you have to become someone that you've never been before.
Mm.
So it's almost like the first step you take on that journey, whoever you were in the beginning, quote unquote, dies.
Mm.
It's
Yes.
like that whole thing. Joseph Campbell has this concept called the hero's journey.
Mm.
Okay. And I think you can probably attest to this, that you probably went through that hero's journey process when you wrote your first book, and then I call it your classic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because you're never the same after that, because now once you have a completed book, people look at you differently.
Yes. Yes.
They look at you as somebody said that the word author is actually short for authority.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So now everyone views you as an expert in something.
Yes. Yes.
you know
And to those writers out there who are listening, you just heard some of the most valuable information because it's the art of completion so many times. What faith does is it keeps us writing. I think Picasso, one of the great painters, said that he said whenever he was at his lowest point, he would paint. that no matter what happened,
mm,
his solution to everything was to paint. You're broke,
mm,
you're homeless, paint. Do whatever, paint. and,
mm.
and so as an author, I think what the world responds to is you have completed something.
Right.
And that's something that many people never complete anything in their lives. And so I often counsel young writers, say to them, listen, if you just finish it, don't let doubt about the quality of the work, doubt about the outcome, doubt about the marketability undermine your ability to complete it.
Hmm.
And don't let perfection stand in the way of completion.
Right. Right.
You know, many times you can't edit and fix what you don't have. So your
Mm-mm, no.
so your obligation is to get it completed. Complete it based on your level of skill, your level of consciousness, your level of commitment.
Mm,
Always, I had a teacher once, Tiamo Rauf, and his life was about his watchword was, "Did you complete yourself? That whatever
mm,
the task was, did you finish it?"
right.
And you maybe it didn't finish it exactly the way you thought it was going to work out, but you finished it. And that's what your book and I think all of us as authors and those people who want to be authors, listen to what this man just said. Chris just said some very powerful stuff. It just said that idea is you say that process before the prize. Just do the work. Don't worry about the why. Don't worry about the how. You do the
Hmm.
work. You sit there and you make that thing happen. The how will take care of itself. Wow. Mm.
Yeah.
Chris,
And
yes, yes.
just go, yeah, just going through that process itself, it to me it felt more like I was building a book as opposed to writing it,
Mm,
because you're taking something, basically you're creating something out of ether.
mm, yes.
Reverend Ike always talked about things going through three processes, from the ether to the psychic to the
Mm-hmm.
material.
Yeah.
And to be able to take an idea from ether, put clothes on it, I guess, take it through the psychic, and then
Mm-hmm.
finally come into a material form. And what I've also learned in this is, and this is for all authors,
Yes.
regardless of your genre, regardless of what you're writing about, you must assume that somebody is waiting for your solution.
Mm. Woo, assume, but they say begin with the end in mind.
Right.
Yes. Mm.
So just remember somebody, because there's a friend of mine, she's back in New Jersey now. When she was in North Carolina, I was telling her about, my book writing journey. She started working and she had finished her first working draft of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing I always kept telling her is, always remember that somebody is waiting for that solution,
Mm. Woo,
if
yes.
nothing else.
Yes. And that's, you know what? That's using the gift that God gave you. God gives you a gift, gives you a seed, and as a great planter, as a great farmer of dreams, the creator of the universe, your job is to take that seed and work with it and nurture it
Mm,
and water it and fertilize it and pull up the weeds around it because somebody's waiting to feast on that fruit. Wow. Mm.
yeah. And something else came up when you were talking, the story of the master and the servants and the talents.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have a different interpretation of that lesson.
Mm-hmm.
My interpretation is this: whatever you're given, you have to be able to create and increase the market value.
Mm.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times we don't understand that we have to begin to create and increase the value of whatever is in our toolkits,
Mm.
because everyone here has a divine assignment to solve a problem for large groups of people.
Mm.
Okay.
Yes.
And so it's like it's not about you, but it's bigger than you.
Mm. Wow. Yes.
Okay. It's much bigger than you. And whatever it is that you do right will outlive you. And so
Mm.
you have to ask yourself, as for me, I had to ask myself, how will this book impact the next 7 generations?
Mm. Yes.
Okay. Because Dr. Monroe, he said something, he says, the world is ruled by dead men. And that's why he talked about the importance of writing books, because it's those ideas who outlive the author.
Mm. Wow. Chris, we're gonna have to do a part two and a part three because you are taking people on a journey. That's
Mm.
really what it is. And on a journey, one of the most comforting things is to know that somebody else has been down that road before.
Yes, indeed.
You know, to, to say, to say, and say when you're at that lowest point in your life, to say that's somebody who slept in their car, didn't have let's say a pot to do in and a window to throw it out. That somebody
Yeah.
has a multi-million-dollar studio. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that somebody who had a dream was able to get through it all, and as Maya Angelou says, and still I rise. And so
Yeah.
what I think you have shared is this a transformative experience. One of the
Mm-hmm.
things I listen, you are a reader. You read a lot. And to our listeners, that's key. Because just as we were talking, look at the different people you've related to. Miles Monroe, Les Brown, on down the list, Mr. Campbell, that these things help you almost like fill your house. It's like a mind, it's like a big empty house. And the more you read, the more you learn about couches and chairs and paintings
Mm-hmm.
and decorating.
Exactly.
And have you always been a reader?
I would have to say yes. And I came up in a generation where before computers and Microsoft and Apple, the geeks were the ones who collected and read comic books.
Mm,
So I was always a comic book reader, and I'm probably telling my age where I said that I can remember getting a comic book for a quarter.
mm,
Okay.
yes.
And one of the first comic books I actually read, it was The Falcon.
Mm,
That was the first black superhero that I was exposed to before Black Panther. It was The Falcon.
mm.
Because in the comic book series that I was reading, the Falcon had always teamed up with Captain America.
Teamed up with
Okay.
who you broke up there for a minute.
Captain America.
Captain America. Okay.
Okay. So that kind of inspired me to read,
Mm-hmm.
and I was reading more comic books as they got more expensive. They went to 35 cents, 50 cents, 75, a dollar.
Mm-hmm.
Now everything's graphic novels. I don't think you can find a graphic novel for under $16 now.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Yeah.
So comic books was my first introduction into the power of reading.
Mm. Wow. And then the rest is history.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Do you read on a regular schedule? A lot of folks, you know, one excuse a lot of people give for not reading is to say, well, I never have time. I'm so busy, etc. And do you read it on a regular schedule? Because a lot of times, if you don't schedule it, it doesn't get done.
Yeah. The Honorable Marcus Garvey, in his course of African philosophy, he says that Black people should engage in 4 hours of productive reading daily.
Mm.
Okay. Now, in today's world, I think that's more of an ideal, but
Mm-hmm.
everyone should be reading a newspaper. I'm not just not your local newspaper. you
Yes.
should be reading the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. I read USA Today on a regular.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So something that can expand and stretch your mind. Okay.
Mm.
What I learned was this is they say the average American only reads one book a year.
Mm.
And you won't believe the genre of book that most Americans read as far as that one book a year. It's a romance novel.
Romance novel. Okay.
Okay. And
Yes.
I also learned, yeah, and I also learned this. I always tell people I can make you an expert for under $50.
Mm.
I said, how many books minimum would it take you to become an expert in a certain field or a certain discipline? The answer, 3.
Mm. Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
By reading 3 books in a certain discipline. So let's say if you want to learn more about marketing,
Mm-hmm.
if you can read 3 books on marketing, you would have put yourself ahead of 9% of the American population. That's just
Wow.
the start.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And then the more you read and then apply what you've read, or you allow yourself to think about what you've read, um, you could easily put yourself in more of an expert category.
Mm. Mm.
Just
Yeah.
and so the adage of leaders or readers,
Yes.
there is a lot of truth to that.
Yes. Yes. Wow. Chris, I tell you, this time has gone by so fast. Um, one thing I just want to get your comments on the 12 universal laws of success. You were always there in the really early stages, when we were I was listening to your journey, and when we were getting into the self-publishing and the
Mm.
self-promotion and how that worked. How did you first encounter the 12 universal laws of success?
Actually, I came across it in college.
Mm-hmm.
Every Saturday, I would take a trip to Barnes and Noble and Borders. So
Mm-hmm.
one Saturday, I think I was downstairs and I came across the book. It had a different cover at the
Uh-huh.
time.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, the cover had like an African mask on it.
Yeah. And black and red. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so from there, that kind of became something that, I bought it. I don't know if I still have that copy,
Uh-huh.
but that was the first time I got exposed to your work,
Mm-hmm.
was getting it in a Barnes and Noble in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Wow. Mm-hmm. That's amazing, man. Now, when you got the book, did it help you in your journey and your search?
I think it did because everyone talks about Think and Grow Rich.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What I found with the 12 universal laws of success, it was more practical and it was more digestible.
Mm.
Okay. Especially when you talk about solving the riddle of survival.
Yes.
Okay. Which is something that a lot of young men struggle with,
Mm.
is that, figuring out the riddle of survival, because you're trying to teach them to make sure that you can cover the basics,
Yes.
and they want to sit up here and the floss and gloss.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And not making sure that those basic necessities covered. It's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy,
Mm-hmm.
you know and I think that's where a lot of young men who may want to marry, but they understand the economic burden that comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them feel that they're not in an economic position to take on a wife and children,
Wow. Yes. Yes. Mm.
you know. So just for them being able to provide food, clothing, and shelter for themselves, for a lot of them, it's still a very challenging prop.
Wow. Thank you. That section was written, from personal experience. you know,
Okay.
yeah, from personal
Okay.
experience, man. You got to really go broke 2 or 3 times to understand the value of being rich, to understand the value of just having your mind free. One of I interviewed
Mm,
Ken Brown, and Ken was a young
mm,
man that, as he said, came from very humble beginnings. He said before he was 16, his family had been evicted 10 times. They'd moved. And one of the things he said was that he lived in poverty, but poverty didn't live within him.
mm.
and when he was expressing what the good life was, it was a life, he calls it, his book was called Life, Live in Freedom Every Day.
Mm.
And the heart of that, you know, the economic part, that's solving the riddle of survival. There's that scripture that says, you know, um, money is a terrible master, but a powerful servant. And
Yes.
yes, and once you've mastered that, so that you are now the master of money, and you've solved that riddle of survival, so you don't have to keep going back to the well and that's really what you're talking about in the economics, that as a people, we have to solve that riddle of survival, so that once that's taken care of, what we can fly, we can go to greater heights. But if we keep having to struggle to survive every
Yeah.
day, day in and day out, we'll always stay locked in that
Mm.
lower position.
And
So,
and the other
mhm,
thing, yeah, when what you brought up, it also brings up for me Ecclesiastes 11, 1,
mhm,
1 and 2,
mhm,
where those two verses actually teach about having multiple streams of income,
mhm,
where it says you should have 7 to 8 streams. So if one stream uh, dies, you can kind of capitalize off other streams until you're able to get that stream resurrected again.
yes, wow. Well, Chris, we we've covered some space, man. Yeah, I love interviewing and talking with you because you're such a wealth of knowledge, and you
Mm.
mastered the knowledge. Like there are people who say speeches, and there are people who understand the message.
Okay.
And you have internalized, from Maslow's theory. I said, now, to understand those things on a practical level, to understand it. When we were talking about the solving the rhythm of survival, that really was at the core of that. When you said that, I was like, yeah, yeah, I got it, man. That was at the core of
Yeah.
it, because until you handle those basic things, you're always going to be going in circles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Chris,
Yeah.
are there any final words you'd like to share with our audience tonight? Because you give your website and your contact information, the name of the book again, and just let
Okay.
people know. But any final thoughts?
Um, the one thing that I would say to people is live by your vision and not your condition.
Mm, woo! Drop the mic, take up a collection.
I can
Go
say
ahead.
is never allow your condition,
Uh-huh.
never allow your condition to cloud your vision.
Mm, never allowed
Okay.
your condition to cloud your vision. Yes, go right ahead.
Because if you're clear about your vision, then a condition is really nothing more than just maybe a stepping stone.
Mm, wow. Well, that's a powerful close, man. That's the word. Share your contact information, Chris.
Okay. For anybody who wants to call me, area code 518 512 9972, or you can email me at Liberty Hall at libhall And right now the website is a work in progress.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But they can reach out to you, and the next book is coming soon.
Yeah, I'm working on the expanded edition of the Gospel of Afronomics Theology, as well as a book that is tentatively titled the Chicago Code. And what the
Mm,
Chicago Code is, it's kind of a Bushido for Black men,
mm,
because I think what I'm seeing, particularly in the wake of all of these uh, murders that's taking place with a lot of our young rap artists, um, there's no code of conduct. There's no universal code of conduct or a Bushido in terms of ideals by which we should live.
mm,
And
mm,
so there's 8 ideals or 8 principles that I lay out in the book,
mm-hmm,
by which we should live.
mm-hmm.
And Chicago is more of an acronym.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay. Mm-hmm,
so I'm kind of working on that simultaneously while I do the extended edition of the book.
mm-hmm.
But hopefully, with the Chicago Code, if all goes well, I'm probably shooting maybe for 2024.
Okay. Good. Now you used the word when you talked about the share. Is that a Japanese word? Bushido. What was that? That you kind of broke up there.
Yeah, Bushido. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The ancient samurai had a code of conduct that they called the Bushido, and was basically made up of 8 virtues by which all the samurai lived.
Mm,
Okay. So one of the things is, when a samurai gives his word,
yes.
it's done.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If he says, I will do this, it's done. So
Mm,
he will just carry out what he will do. Okay.
mm,
I think somebody mentioned it as being impeccable with your word.
yes. Yes. Yeah, I
You
said
know,
Bushido,
so
yeah, I thought that was
uh,
what. Yeah, good, good. I want I hear
yeah.
listeners to hear that once again, that there's so many ideas in so many various places and so many different cultures, and as a writer to really filter and strain them through the process so that you can lay it on people. Like you said, from the samurai to Chicago to a young man facing his future. Wow.
Mm,
All right.
yeah.
Well, my friend, thank you so much, man. I tell you, Chris, we're gonna have to do a part 2 and a part 3, because this is I mean, this is what so many of our young people, especially, but even the older people. A lot of us have forgotten. You know, a lot of us have gotten so much into the 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 matrix that we don't even realize that we're in a matrix. And so, thanks for that
Mm.
enlightenment, my friend. And we're going to have another success talk, because you have so much to offer to the world. And whatever you do, you know, in the words of Reverend Ike, be what you want to be, do what you want to do, have whatever you want to have, always knowing that the best is yet to come. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.